Namaste and welcome. Progress review on Provident Fund Act. Where 20 or more persons are employed in an establishment, the EPF Act becomes applicable. Once applied, the scheme or the act shall continue to apply even in a case where the staff strength falls below 20 subsequently. In case of cinema and theatre, instead of 20 or more persons, the number of persons required is 5 or more for applying the act. A special provision in case of tea industry, it is covered under EPF Act. In case of Assam, the government has set up its own separate provident fund scheme. EPF is not applicable to a cooperative society. It is not applicable to an establishment set up by central government or state government with similar schemes, and it is not applicable to establishments which are permitted to have their own schemes under approval from Employee Provident Fund organization, just like the individual big corporates who have got their own schemes, and certain establishments which are exempt by central government by notification. These are the four situations. And central government can also exempt an establishment based on the financial position of that establishment on a case-to-case basis. 20 or more persons, even if it falls below 20, once applies, always applies. EPF Act in case of cinema and theatre requires only 5 or more persons. Tea industry is covered under EPF Act, but Assam has got its own PF scheme for tea plantations. EPF Act doesn't apply to cooperative society, doesn't apply to establishments of central and state government who have their own schemes, and it doesn't apply to organizations who are permitted by the Employee Provident Fund organization, as the approved schemes are there with those corporates, and certain establishments as may be exempted by central government by notification. And central government may give exemption based also on financial position. An employee is required to become a member from the date of joining the employment. It starts with his joining, eligibility or otherwise. At the time of joining, if a person's salary is above 15,000, he is an excluded employee. He will not be included under the scheme because 15,000 is the ceiling for availing PF benefit. At the time of joining, it should be less than 15,000 or equal to 15,000. Once an employee is a member, even if his salary goes beyond 15,000 after he joins, he continues to be a member. It doesn't stop. But while calculating his contribution will be calculated on a maximum of 15,000, ignoring his actual salary, which is more than 15,000. The Act applies to all regular employees, but it doesn't consider apprentice. Apprentices are not employees under the Act. If the number of staff in a company is 20 or more, once the PF Act applies, the contribution to be done by employer is 12%, and employee also will pay 12%. If the number of staff is less than 20 employees after the Act applies, the company or employer has to contribute 10%, and employee also contributes an equal amount. Means under PF, employee contributes an equal amount along with the employer for Provident Fund scheme only. Every person joins PF at the time of joining the employment. At the time of joining, if the salary is above 15,000, the person will not be having benefit of PF. He is an excluded employee. Once a person joins and is eligible, and subsequently if his salary goes up, he continues to be a member. When the salary subsequently goes beyond 15,000, the PF contribution will be restricted to a percentage of the salary of 15,000 only. An apprentice is not covered under EPF Act. Where the number of members is 20 or more, employer contributes 12%, employee also contributes 12%. But where the number falls below 20, the establishment will pay 10% and employee will also pay 10%. The employer makes three contributions. Effectively, one, he contributes towards PF. His PF contribution is 12. He contributes towards EDLI, it is 0.5%, and he contributes towards administrative charges 0.5%. We are talking of employer's contribution, three components. To PF it is 12%, to EDLI 0.5%, and Provident Fund Scheme 0.5%. This is not contributed by the employee. This is not contributed by the employee. Employee contributes only towards PF. Employee also contributes 12%. And whatever 12% paid by the employer, it is split into two components. 3.67 is Employee Provident Fund EPF, and the balance is transferred to Employee Pension Scheme. This splitting takes place only in the contribution of employer, and whatever employee contributes 12%, it goes straight away into EPF. Employer contributes 8.3%. Employee does not contribute separately. This 8.33% is coming from here. The contribution of employer to EDLI, as we saw, is 0.5% of the monthly pay. 0.5% of 15,000 ceiling is 75 per employee. Minimum administrative charges. If there are hardly any employees, he has to pay 500 per month per establishment. The contribution to the fund has to be remitted within 15 days. Where the employer has his own employees and also employees hired through contractor, the employer is responsible to pay both contributions from his side, and he can recover from his contractor separately. Employer shall in the first instance pay the contribution payable by himself and also on behalf of employees employed through a contractor, and he can collect it from the contract. Employer contributes 12% to PF, and which is split into EPF and Employee Pension Scheme as 3.67 and 8.33 respectively, EDLI 0.5% and administrative charges 0.5%. 8.33 is just highlighted as transferred to Employee Pension Scheme. Contribution of employer to EDLI 0.5% per establishment. He has to pay 500 rupees if the number of staff is less. The contribution to the fund has to be remitted by 15th of the subsequent month. Employer is responsible to pay for his employees and also for employees of his contractor, but he can recover from the contractor separately. Whenever an employer has got an appeal against any demand, his job is first to deposit at least 75% of the amount due as determined under the Act, and then file an appeal under EPF Appellate Tribunal. And when a person is transferred from one employment to another, or he changes an employment, balance in his credit is transferred using his universal account number under the system automatically. PF is allowed to be withdrawn partially by the employee subject to conditions, and the purposes are: it can be medical purpose, marriage of self and children, education which is post matriculation, purchase or construction of a house, home loan payment, or house renovation. These are the broad categories of purposes for which PF balance can be withdrawn after certain conditions are met. And pension is available for the persons under EPF, but the minimum service of 10 years with an organization. The organization may be one or more. A person may work in different organizations. If his service is minimum 10 years between organizations, he will be paid pension from the age of 58 till death. And if a person works even after he attains 58 years of age, his pension contribution which the employer makes, only employer contributes towards EPS. The employer need not contribute towards EPS once the person crosses 58 years of age. He can continue in service. The employer, just because he pays for EPF pension and EDLI, he cannot in any way deduct or reduce the wage levels of the employee, and his liability is in addition to the salary. It cannot be taken out of the salary of the employee. An employer, whenever he has got an appeal filed on the demand raised on him to the EPF appellate tribunal, first he has to deposit 75% of the amount due, then he has to proceed with his appeal. When an employee shifts his employment, leaves and joins another company or establishment, balance in his PF account is transferred automatically under the universal account number of the employee. Accumulations in the Provident Fund can be withdrawn subject to certain conditions on minimum service and purpose. The purposes are medical, marriage, house construction, purchase of a house, home loan repayment or house renovation. Pension will be paid to the employee once he completes 10 years of overall service. Need not be in only one organization. It can be in one or more. And the pension is from completion of 58 years till death. Where an employer employs a person who is older than 58 years, the pension contribution of the employer stops once the employee crosses 58. Thereafterwards, the employer need not contribute towards pension. No employer can reduce the wage of an employee for payment of benefits under EPF. The pension fund at the national level is managed by the central board, and the central board is assisted by an executive committee which is once again appointed by the central government. Effectively what we are saying is central board administers and it is assisted by executive committee, and both are set up by the central government. Pension fund is administered by central board. Section 5AA provides for appointment of executive committee by the central government to assist the central board in the performance of its functions. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.